Hi everyone and welcome back to That UFO podcast. My name is Andy and this is your UFO news update for, we're going to call it the end of August 2025 as we move into September 2025. We're very much on the road to the UAP hearing on the 9th of September, but there is a lot of news to cover across this show. Thank you in advance to everyone who has played their part and got in touch. You'll hear your questions and thoughts as we go across the show. If you want to get involved, make sure you email the usual email address. I'll give you those at the end. They are in the description for the podcast too, or use the website contact form. Anyway, listen, here's the latest UFO, UAP news and what it means for a really interesting time in the UFO topic. And I suppose if you want to call it the top story as such, we have the hearing, like I say, the UFO hearing, the UAP hearing, whatever you want to call it, now confirmed for the 9th of September 2025. And we know who our three witnesses are. Well, we don't know their names or who exactly, but we know the what. So we know we have a former US Air Force veteran who can speak on up to 5 UAP incidents from his time in the service. We have a US Navy officer who witnessed UAP events firsthand, and another US Air Force officer with first-hand encounters. So like I say, no names previously given. What we've had previously, folks, just to rewind a little bit, are some hearings in 2022, 2023 and 2024. So 2022, we had senior DoD officials, Moultrie and Bray. You know, they talked about institutional disclosures. It was very cautious, very little first-hand reporting. I believe that was the hearing that had the clusterfuck with the VLC media player that looked completely amateur. And I remember, and you may remember if you watched it, Moultrie and Bray spent a lot of time looking at each other doing the, I'm not too familiar with that, are you? Almost playing dumb. And you know what? Maybe they were guilty by association. Maybe they didn't know, and ignorance is bliss, so they could deny from a plausible point of view. But that was the first kind of hearing we had. 2023, it was David Grush. That was the big one. Of course, with a shout out to David Fravor and Ryan Graves. You've got pilots and a former intelligence official. Now, Grush was the name. Grush is the one that we're still reeling from in a lot of different ways. Claims of crash recoveries, pilot sightings, safety concerns, biologics, and a really interesting line of questioning from folks like Tim Burchett, Anna Polina Luna, Representative Eric Burleson, and others, which again was the big one for me. And I think for some of you listening or watching this, I'm guessing you would agree, and I'd love to hear folks on that. And I'm going to ask you a question in just a second. Then, of course, 2024, we had a mix of military, scientific insiders, journalists, and a NASA official. And that was, of course, Mike Gold from NASA. We had Michael Schellenberger, who was the journalist presenting the Immaculate Constellation document. Strangely, seemed to be a bit of a one and done. Luis Elizondo, of course, and we had Timothy Gallaudet, former Rear Admiral Timothy Gallaudet, as part of that. There was a broader scope, broader conversation. Again, safety risks came up, secret programs, insider testimony, scientific policy. It fell flat for me. And I think at the time, I remember speaking with Dan, who hopefully we'll get back on in the coming weeks. We spoke after those breakdowns around it not being a nothing burger, but I think we were mixed. I remember at the time, and I'll probably have to go back and watch it, but I was quite impressed with Nancy Mace, who within hours of impressing me was selling t-shirts and playing down the topic. And I don't know what happened there. It was such a strange hearing. It really was. And we had the questions around, you know, Christ, was there not something about pigeons being cameras or whatever it was? Who knows? But yeah, that was a really, really weird hearing for me, and it definitely fell flat. I don't know what happened there. I still get the feeling there were meant to be folks there who didn't end up being able to testify. Of course, the big takeaway was the Immaculate Constellation document, and we'll get to some Matthew Brown, who is the author of said document news, in a few moments. So in 2025, how does this hearing differ? Well, we're expected to have all first-hand military witnesses focusing on direct experiences. Yeah, that could mean a whole range of things though. Are we going to get the real first-hand I touched a craft? I don't think so. What I hope we don't get, and it's all up in the air at the moment, I'm going to have Stephen Bassett actually on the podcast to discuss the hearings with me in advance to kind of work out what we may or may not get. But I hope we don't get people just retelling their sightings. You know, there were lights that followed us, you know, we've got some data. It needs to be something more, but what that is right now, I don't know. I like the idea that you go in with tempered expectations, proceed with caution. You can't be let down too much if you do that, and I think that's probably true of a lot of things in life. But yeah, I'm excited for the hearing on like a low level basis. And then what comes from it could be really interesting as well. Ross Coulthart on his News Nation podcast recently said, you know, the hearings publicly are a dog and pony show, which is more than likely correct. However, that's true of anyone with sources that, you know, you can't share everything you know to a certain extent, that people are going to stand up and there's only so much they can say publicly. And that's true. However, there are things they can say publicly that I don't think are said, and we know that with things like the gimbal videos not getting the full-length declassifications of different things. So yeah, I'd love to know people's thoughts on this one. Are you excited or not for the hearing? I know I discussed that last week, but as things tumble towards the actual date on the 9th of September, I wonder if you get a little bit more excited for it. But yeah, we shall see. Something to move on to another story that is tied in very much is an update on the Age of Disclosure documentary. The much maligned, I think at this point, Age of Disclosure documentary from Dan Farah, producer of multiple features, including Steven Spielberg's Ready Player One, was the big one I know of. Of course, this documentary has a lot of talking heads. I won't go back over all that. However, it's not going to be a screening for the public that's going to be happening. Reported from UAP James, who I love checking out online, and I recommend if you are on social media at UAP James. The Age of Disclosure will be shown to Congress in 2 private screenings as voting begins on the UAP Disclosure Act. Danny Sheehan has confirmed the Senate will be shown the film the week of September the 8th, and Representative Andre Carson will have a showing for the House on the week of September 15. That is according to Danny Sheehan, who I imagine would be in the know with that. What to look out for, folks: comments and views from those who get to see it. And I don't want to be a buzzkill on this one. However, the documentary has been seen. We know it got its premiere, a couple of screenings at the South by Southwest Film Festival back earlier this year in March and April. Go back and check out the episodes I done at the time with Chase Kelly, who was attending the premiere in person, who discussed it with me, including other listeners who had attended. The feedback was it's good but not groundbreaking. I think if you want to see it as groundbreaking, it would have to be from that point of view, that you've got some really high-ranking politicians and officials discussing something rather incredible. However, there are no huge claims, there are no clips that we haven't seen before being used. It's very dry, and it has a lot of talking heads. So yeah, on that, I think a really good question. Unidentified, who is a wonderful over on the Patreon channel, said, Andy, the Age of Disclosure will get a private screening for the US Senate and, if I understand correctly, Congress. These screenings will happen as the politicians vote on whether to include the UAP Disclosure Act in this year's NDAA. Part of me wonders if this was the true purpose of creating the documentary. The reasons we have not seen a public release are: there is no urgency as the public is not the primary audience. As such, it's appropriate to delay public release until these private screenings take place, or maybe until after the NDAA passes, should the UAP Disclosure Act be included. What do you think? Good question. I think for me that makes sense in a way. However, I don't then understand why it had its premiere at South by Southwest. That is a place where you get hype, you look for distribution, you network. And if this documentary is largely made for politicians, then it didn't need Dan Farah attached to it. You know, other folks could have done it, and it could have been done quietly, but it wasn't. It was made like a documentary, made for the public. And I just wonder if they've either, and this is purely speculation, folks, I genuinely don't know, and I hope it's not the case, but have they just not had the uptake on it they would want? Again, Is it perhaps lacking in footage and stuff to really capture the imagination? I don't see the general public having an appetite for a 90-minute talking head documentary, given a lot of the talking heads, and bear in mind, folks, I've not seen it still, are representatives from Congress, the military and whatnot, that the general public largely won't care about, especially outside of the United States. These people don't mean a lot to other folks. And without the headline or attention-grabbing footage, clips, things like that, maybe even some of the wilder speculation that people may or may not like, maybe it just doesn't have the reach that they hope, and it's going to end up landing on a platform like a Netflix or an Amazon or an Apple TV, but not to the fanfare they would hope and it would perhaps need. So maybe what it is has changed. We've heard the rumours recently, some of us, and it was reported a few weeks ago, that there's an issue between Luis Elizondo's camp and Dan Farah and the whole acting as an agent and the involvement in the literacy agreement with the book deal, and that because things had changed, they were holding it back. I don't know if any of that's true or not, and I haven't seen any comment or follow-up on that. But yeah, for me, I don't know. I think it's basically they haven't got a distribution deal yet, or perhaps they're going to show it. Maybe they have the deal, and this is me being positive. Maybe they have the deal, and this is going to launch after the hearings. And that's a kind of good way to viral market it, perhaps. Who knows? Again, I'd love to know people's thoughts on that. But it's one of those things now, isn't it? This age of disclosure, which is becoming almost lower in the UFO community. But yeah, there we go. Moving on to something that I feel is definitely a more positive sign of things to come, hopefully. Matthew Brown, author of the Immaculate Constellation document, is back. Matthew Brown, who of course came forward earlier this year through the Weaponized podcast with Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp, is back online after a somewhat quiet spell. He started up a Substack blog to share his story. He announced this on Twitter, and I'll put the link in the comments for what he said online. I'm just going to read you what he said online announcing this. So, it's almost been 4 months since my interview with Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp was released. A lot of questions remain about myself, about the phenomena, about our government, and about what the future holds. I do not have answers. I do not have all the answers. No single person ever could, but I am committed to sharing what I can. However, the harsh truth is this. To obtain the answers we seek, our system must change. This change has already started. It cannot be stopped. But the pace and final outcome depends on us. I am telling my story here to inspire, to inform, and to support the movement. My hope is that we will, in time, take the thoughtful steps necessary to achieve disclosure, restore our constitution, and advance our civilization. He then puts a link to the Substack, which will be in the description, folks. Revealing that which the powerful have concealed, unravelling a century of lies, overturning the tables in the temple, none of this will happen unless we decide to act. Thank you for those who already have, more will come. And of course, he's got a lot of support in those comments and whatnot. For me, I've reached out to Matthew. I got a little approval salute from him some time ago when I said thank you for what he's done. I'd love to get Matthew on the podcast. Is that likely? I don't know at the moment, but I always ask the question, folks, and maybe if you want to see Matthew on the podcast, his username is Son of Abramelin, and I'll put the link in the description. Go and check that out. Maybe give him a nudge if you want to see him on the podcast. But, you know, he's a busy guy with a lot on his plate, I'm sure, with all of this. Definitely check out his blog on his Substack. Part 1 is a very quick read, and it covers his background, growing up, his career, and the story we know about Immaculate Constellation. In pretty short form, to be honest. I really like Matthew, and from what we've seen and heard of him, I look forward to seeing Part 2, which I think is going to go into a little bit more of the murkier detail behind that. Real interesting timing, again, just ahead of the hearing coming out. A lot of folks hope to hear more or see more from David Grush. I imagine his work is being done quietly in the background in all of this. A question on this particular topic, and you might notice, folks, I'm trying to play with the format on these news updates, which people are enjoying, which is wonderful, and I'm integrating the listener questions during this as well. So David, on the Matthew Brown situation, said, Matthew coming back to the conversation is a pretty big deal, I think. There are lots of questions he has heard over the past few months, and maybe we get some answers, such as, How can you be sure about what you saw? How can you be sure what you saw was not just war games or a psyop situation like what was in the Wall Street Journal article? Number 2, please elaborate on the Matrix comments. Number 3, what compelled him to come back now with hearings on the horizon? I'm really curious what he has to say. And yeah, I think we all are, David, on that. For me, there's definitely more to expand on. And I wonder, with Matthew coming forward in this way with the Substack, are we going to see him appear back on with Jeremy and George on the Weaponized platform to share that story in a different format? I can't imagine Joe Rogan, again, big platform, wouldn't want to host a Matthew Brown. Jesse Michaels, American Alchemy, Danny Jones, Concrete. These are guys with some clout, some money behind them. They have the opportunity, I would hope, to pay these guests for their time and at least compensate, obviously, their travel expenses, all that kind of stuff as well, to get them into a setting they're comfortable and happy to share their story. And I would love to see them on some of those bigger platforms, as well as the smaller platforms like this. So yeah, thank you to Matthew for coming back forward. And yeah, I think he definitely has more to share. And the way he left the Weaponized podcast, it was almost on a bit of a cliffhanger. And I'd like to see more said. Maybe Matthew is waiting to see what gets said at the hearing to then see how much more he shares of his story. On that, something else making headlines is Skywatcher. Now, we're now 8 months into the year, almost 9 months into the year, folks, depending on when you listen to this. Maybe we're well into the next several years, depending on you're listening to this in the back catalogue. Hello to the future. Skywatcher announced earlier in the year that they would hope to have real results by the end of 2025. However, what may hamper that is one of the founders, James Fowler, of the organisation, who was known for bringing along and having that dog whistle technology, has moved on from the organisation to a new role. The dog whistle, there are 2 ways, folks, very quickly, that Skywatcher claim to be able to contact or summon these craft or communicate in a way. Is one, psionically, using a psionic asset. I spoke to James Hodgkins recently, who is one of these psionic assets. They basically psychically channel these craft, try and contact and communicate with them to bring them closer, to study, to collect data. The other was mechanical, using an object, the dog whistle that we hear. I visualise it as a big box in my head. You flick a switch, it creates a frequency or signal, these objects come close. Apparently it has a 100% accuracy rate. So here's James's statement anyway. From August 2024 to July 2025, I had the opportunity to serve as a founder and consultant at Skywatcher, where I led field operations supporting the mission of exploring unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP, and advancing air domain awareness. I am stepping away from active involvement with Skywatcher, with my contributions now limited to my foundational work. I am excited to focus on a new venture in aerial intelligence, dedicated to building innovative technology to address complex challenges in this field. I remain proud of my foundational contributions at Skywatcher and wish the team continued success in their future endeavours. He has tagged Skywatcher, Jake Barber and Gary Nolan. So this, of course, has got a lot of folks talking. There were rumours, and I've got to say unconfirmed rumours, that already have been swirling about NDAs being signed recently. To be fair, it wouldn't surprise me that NDAs were involved in this or any organisation like it. It's normal to have a non-disclosure agreement with all kinds of things to not get information out in the public you don't want out there. And that can be for any number of reasons, both private, commercial and such. Not that we've found evidence of ET life, don't share it. I don't think that's necessarily what it is. More of a protection. But now there's more government involvement, and Fowler's new role certainly stirs the pot even more that one of their prized assets with a big piece of their project, the dog whistle, is gone. Matthew Pines, who is part of the organisation and a wonderful commentator on the UFO topic online, has commented to say don't listen to gossip and rumour. And I'll read you now Skywatcher's comment on the situation, folks. So Skywatcher said, this was August 18th, the Skywatcher team is excited to congratulate James Fowler on his new venture contracting with the US government, and we sincerely thank him for his contributions to Skywatcher. He has played a key role in all of our field operations and in the data we have collected. As of this past July, our team has completed its initial round of field operations, during which data was captured for 7 to 10 days each month, beginning in January. We now hold more than 10 terabytes of data and have assembled an external team of analysts and subject matter experts who have begun their work. We are working with world-class independent scientists, physicists and radar specialists to evaluate the data in accordance with our discovery framework. In short, we have now entered our analysis phase. We are pursuing this work scientifically and rigorously, and we will share our findings as soon as they are available. The entire team is moving as quickly as possible. We'll have more updates to share soon. So, a fair statement, a transparent statement. You could read it multiple different ways. Let me read a question first then from Long Knife and Ginger Hipster, who both had some questions on this. So Long Knife said the whole Fowler going back to government and taking his ball with him seems like exactly what they wanted. Someone in government to tell him to stop, or the PSYOP had run its course, time to wind down. Ginger Hipster, I'll get to in just a second. It's more of a statement, so let me answer the question first from Long Knife. So Fowler going back to government, you could look at it in multiple different ways, and people are. One, the government has won. They've got involved. They have stopped them. I've talked about on this show, and other people have as well, that part of Skywatcher's remit or modus operandi was a non-public one to reach out to people within government to say, stop us. We want to help. We want to get on board. Don't make us do this the way we think we need to do it. Let's work together. Perhaps that's what's happened. You could look at it as the government shutting things down and signing one of the star players from the team, a real contributing player in James Fowler. However, in the Skywatcher statement, they're saying their analysis was complete, or their data collection was complete come July. So maybe it was just a good time to move on. Maybe this was pre-arranged. Maybe this was a long-standing commitment that James Fowler knew he was going for, and it was data collection was done. Skywatcher no longer necessarily need that equipment as much as I'm guessing they would have liked to have it, but it was a good time to separate, and now they're in an analysis phase that doesn't require that dog whistle. So there are positives to look at from this. I remain hopeful but sceptical that Skywatcher can come through by the end of the year. I'd love to speak to someone from the organisation. It's difficult to get folks to reach out, but again, if they are in this kind of data collecting and now analysis phase, maybe they don't have anything to tell us. They're doing their updates online as and when they can. So yeah, I wonder how this changes people's opinions or thoughts on Skywatcher as a project. They're 3/4 of the way through the year. They've got a few months now to see what they can provide, and I wonder, is 3 months enough to go through 10 terabytes of data? Let's wait and see. Fingers crossed. Ginger Hipster, great name. Says there are now a variety of people and groups in the private sector who say they can summon UAP through tech, consciousness, or some combination of both. This seems like it should be a bigger deal. Speaking as someone from outside the US, I have absolutely no confidence in the efforts being made within the borders of that nation, and I think that folks in the US with good intent working towards disclosure should work beyond the realm of their national allegiance for the good of all people. Support for controlled disclosure with allegiance to national interest is in support of efforts that have caused massive harm to many people. I suppose I can't disagree with that idea that we often hear about the American people deserve to know, and more than half this audience is based in the United States. So say to that what you will. It does seem to be mainly the Americans, the American government, American specialists who are working on this topic, not to downplay the work being done by other folks. But if that's where the work is, then they are speaking to that American public and the American psyche, the American people, American voters, American taxpayers, American funding on this. And that's nice to see. For example, the Sol Foundation has their symposium at the end of October in Milan, in Italy. So they've moved over to Europe for this year's symposium. I am fortunate I'm going to be attending the symposium. So anyone who is going, it'd be great to meet up, let me know. But that's good to see they're moving outside of their remit of the States. And this is a worldwide phenomena. Let's get folks, journalists, academics, scientists from outside the United States involved. And perhaps that's what's going to happen at the Sol Foundation this year as well. The Sol Foundation, of course, co-founded by Gary Nolan, and of course he has that involvement still with Skywatcher. Remember, folks, Gary Nolan stated that if he felt there was any moral issue with Skywatcher and their work and them having any nefarious intent towards these UAP or craft, whatever they are, he would leave. And I am using Gary Nolan as my canary in the coal mine for Skywatcher, that as and when he steps away, I suppose a red flag would go up for me with that one. So we'll wait and see on that. But yeah, Skywatcher changes afoot in that organisation. We'll see what comes next. But I would expect to hear from them perhaps in September as they publish part 3 of their documentary, which is kind of going along the way. Another interesting story that hit the headlines is the release or leak of a Tic-Tac manual. Now, folks, this is basically a document has been released. It seems to show the design and construction of the said Tic-Tac, now famous Tic-Tac. Multiple folks from various tech backgrounds moved very quickly to comment on issues with this, but let me read the original post first, okay? So here's what was said. Alleged leak, possibly disinformation. Documents of Lockheed Martin's CL-956, the Tic-Tac, according to the leak. The Lockheed Martin CL-957, nicknamed Tic-Tac, was created in the early 2000s as part of the secret Project Orbit Lance. This advanced transmedium vehicle, designed for aerospace operations, is presently being tested at Groom Lake and Dugway Proving Grounds. Developed by Skunkworks for in-depth intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance and quick reaction tasks, the CL-957 incorporates groundbreaking propulsion technology that uses inertial mass reduction and directed gravity manipulation. This enables quiet, extreme G performance in atmospheric, orbital and underwater environments. Its smooth, seamless body is made from a flexible metamaterial outer layer that offers complete stealth across all wavelengths, adjustable surface shaping and integrated energy field management. By 2004, the initial version of this system began limited operational deployment under a special access program. Like I say, folks, if you're watching on YouTube, the picture just next to me is going to be of said manual. However, there were so many people immediately found issues from various tech backgrounds, people with an expertise in photoshopping and whatnot, commenting on issues with the wording, the labelling, the typography, the font, even finding that the image used on the front of the manual is a copy of another image that appeared online years after this manual was produced, and I believe was CGI. But this is where we are. There is a lot of nonsense, a lot of disinformation being pushed online. This one is, folks, I would file under nonsense, but is also interesting. This kind of stuff is coming out around the time of the hearings, and there being such chatter again bubbling up as we head towards another peak in the UFO topic, with public interest starting to focus and gaze as the mainstream media will no doubt pick up the UFO conversation. Ross Coulthart mentioned on his latest reality check again, folks, that Skywatcher is constantly being trolled by a lot of accounts that were only created in October and November 2024, part of an ongoing CIA disinformation campaign. Maybe this kind of thing is just another part of that, where people dump stuff online to muddy the water, and it's water that's been very muddy already, folks. That's the main stories. What I want to do is just dive into some listener thoughts and questions off the back of those that I've not sort of got to in the body of the news show. So first off, Windermere comments, I watched as Ross Coulthart corrected his statement that he categorically knew that the Tic-Tac was Lockheed's tech during the Nimitz encounter, to that the Tic-Tac was not Lockheed tech, as he previously had stated, and he walked his statements all the way back to Lockheed was only in control of the Tic-Tac psionically. I believe his original statement was the cause of his split from Bryce Zabel, because he refused to confide who his source was, even with Bryce. I think that this incident has greatly hurt Ross's credibility with not only Bryce but with the public also. What do you think, Andy? Who do you think might be the dubious source, and can Ross repair this massive blunder? Lots of questions to ask here. I have only tossed out a couple. I don't know on this, and I don't want to get involved in he said, she said. I appreciate it did split opinion. That's certainly a factual statement I can make while sitting very firmly with my arse on the fence. It was controversial. And like I say earlier, when Ross mentions things being a dog and pony show, I can see why it upsets folks when he made statements like he did, but then can't go into more detail. Bryce was certainly upset by it, it seemed. I don't know whether that statement in that episode was the cause of their split. Perhaps it wasn't. Only Bryce and Ross, I think would know that. I don't know who the dubious source would be. I think Ross Coulthart has numerous very good sources who have given him credible and good information over the years. We don't know if this was just a mistake, a misstep. Perhaps it's accurate. We don't fully know yet. We can only assume. I fall on the side of I don't believe it is Lockheed Martin technology. And if it is, I think that brings up a whole load of more questions. And again, it's certainly opinion that if you view this as a blunder from Ross Coulthart, people do, people don't. You know, the Reality Check podcast and show is very popular. A lot of folks in the comments there and online do very much support Ross Coulthart, as much as Ross gets a lot of smash from other folks as well. And I've talked about that with Ross some time ago when we've recorded privately and on the podcast. Ross is a strong character and he knows what he's saying, he knows what he's doing. So I don't think either way it would necessarily affect him, the trolling. He's got quite a strong Aussie ethic behind him, which I think is quite similar to that British mentality as well. So certainly I think in the eyes of folks who may feel his credibility has been diminished from this situation, of course I would believe someone like Ross could come back. But it just depends, are people happy with what Ross says going forward? It'll depend. But yeah, it's all very much in the eye of the beholder with this one, folks, for me. I enjoy Ross's commentary, I enjoy what he says, but like with anyone in the UFO topic, and I would encourage folks, the same with myself, just because I share an opinion doesn't mean you need to agree with it or not. I always like to hear various different opinions, different takes, and it makes me question things in different ways as well. So I had no issue with those statements, as much as I perhaps don't agree. Ricky got in touch with a question similarly, and congratulations to Ricky on his new position. I'll just say that much. Ricky was in touch and he's had a promotion, so well done, Ricky. He says, I could possibly buy that the Tic-Tac is or was Lockheed Martin, but if it was, it's extremely bizarre. All the data was snatched up and Admiral G. Gallaudet was left out of the loop. Do you think if it was Lockheed, then that's likely why the Tic-Tac knew the cap point? This whole cap point situation, again, for folks unfamiliar, I think a lot of folks will be by this point, is that the Tic-Tac knew a prearranged point out at sea that the pilots and those involved in those military operations in 2004 with the Nimitz and the Princeton were going to meet. You know, you're out at sea, there's no streets, there's no landmarks, so you plot a point that you can navigate to. I'm still unsure, and please people correct me, that the cap point had been used multiple times before. It wasn't that it found it before it had been used. So it could be the Tic-Tac, whatever it was, knew the cap point through observation. And that could be whether it was alien, interdimensional, human technology, a Chinese drone, Russian manned drone, who knows, but perhaps it knew through observation regardless. In the same way that after time, your dog will sit at the back door to let you know he wants to go out for a walk. Excuse me, folks, a little bit of hiccup there. So yeah, it could be a learned behaviour. It could be it was reading the system. Some folks believe it was reading the pilots' minds. I don't think that was the case on this one. I think it was an observed behaviour based on repeated use of said cap point. Or at least technology using the systems. But yeah, interesting thoughts. And it's funny that here we are 21 years after the Tic-Tac event happened. We're still talking about it and it still seems like it's got something more to give. Some other questions, again, folks, that I never quite got to. Paul says, to what extent do you think that the credibility of NHI being behind UAP has been materially damaged by the examples you list when stepping back and looking at them individually and collectively? And I suppose the examples being the news items for this show. So let me answer it really broadly and pretty quickly. The idea that, you know, we've got these hearings, we've got the Tic-Tac manual dropping, you've got the Immaculate Constellation document, you've got Ross Coulthart's comments on Tic-Tacs, you've got the psionic aspect and the dog whistle aspect of what Skywatcher are doing. I don't think it does damage the idea that NHI are behind UAP. And I'll just use my own personal experience because I think for me that's the best way to put this. No matter who or what lets you down in this subject, whether it's an individual or an organisation or a train of thinking you had or a piece of evidence you've held dear and you've been let down by said person, organisation, evidence. I've had my own experience in the mid-90s where I saw, as people may know, a huge Ferris wheel looking object really close to the ground, moving at incredible speed, spinning on the spot, that shouldn't have been there. For me, I can always go back to that and say, I don't think that was the Russians testing out a new carnival, ride in the middle of Scotland in the mid-90s. I don't think it was the US government. I don't think it was the British government. I think I saw something pretty incredible that wasn't human, and perhaps the more I've been involved in the topic, it was something. When you look at the nature of reality and can something access our reality in a different way to us, did we see it in that small group I was a part of and other people didn't, given it was a busy, built-up suburban area? Perhaps. I don't know. But for me, there's enough evidence to suggest there is at least a non-human element to some of what's happening and going on. And I think the pushback and the cover-up, when you look at the totality of what's happening right now, is enough to suggest this isn't just the US hiding some secret tech, because I think there's a lot of panic from a US point of view, from a Russian point of view, from a Chinese point of view, when it comes to this topic in multiple different ways. Statement from Joe, or a question off the back of a statement he heard. He says, during a podcast where Lou Elizondo and Gary Nolan crossed over, there was a slight overlap where they briefly chatted. The interviewer said, well, you obviously know one another. And Lou responded with, yes, I'm very familiar with Gary and his work in ATIP. In, not for, but in. Interesting dynamic that, isn't it? Particularly with what's happening. I'm not aware of Gary Nolan, working for ATIP. Folks might know that may be common knowledge. I don't think it is if he did. I wouldn't be shocked if Gary Nolan shared some insight, or perhaps some of his work was involved or looked at as part of it. But yeah, I think there is a lot of cross-pollination across the topic, and there has been. And I think this is something I've talked about, how over the last however many years now in the topic, 4 or 5 years, there's been a fracturing as different people have split off and gone into their own ways of working. Maybe there was a pool of folks like Elizondo, Mellon, Nolan, and any number of folks you could throw into that, who in 2020, 2021 were more aligned in their thinking, but as they've got deeper, as they've got more involved, perhaps they have moved off into their own ways of working. Lou Elizondo very much seems to work on his own. I don't see him attached or affiliated with much these days. You've got Gary Nolan with Peter Scafish, Jonathan Bert and the Sol Foundation, and the work they're doing is very scientific, very academic, looking at this from a very different point of view. You've got your Carl Nels getting involved in the topic and speaking at things like the Salt Foundation. Avi Loeb with the Galileo Project, Beatrice Villarreal and the work that she's doing with her transient objects. Skywatcher, Jake Barber, the psionic aspect of this, the fact they can technologically and psionically or psychically contact craft. It's splintered off into so many different directions. That makes things complicated, it makes things naturally more complex, but perhaps it gives us different avenues or paths or opportunities for progress to split off in those different directions. But again, I'd love to know people's thoughts on that splintering. And again, for me right now, the Sol Foundation's one that I very much keep an eye on as it works away quietly and diligently in the background. Brian asks, thoughts on Skinwalker Ranch's ceramic find in the latest series? For me, Brian, very quickly on that one, I'm not up to date with Skinwalker Ranch this series, so I will at some point, but I'm not too sure on that one, so apologies folks. But again, Skinwalker Ranch has its audience. I'd love to hear from folks who do continue to watch as things go on and carry on into further seasons. Are you still enjoying it? Are you feeling that it's getting somewhere? Are we seeing progress from series like Skinwalker Ranch in the UFO topic? It certainly splits opinion. Brian also asked me, has my opinion or trust changed on anyone's narrative over the last 8 years? Without going into individual names, I think what I've managed or learned to do pretty early on, especially the last 2 or 3 years, is take more of a step back. And I decided a long time ago to to hang more on the periphery of the subject, not get involved with individuals, groups, echo chambers, chatter, rumours to an extent that you're sitting in various groups on WhatsApp or Signal or forums and communities. For me personally, it's not my thing, not my bag. And I appreciate maybe folks who listen to this or watch this podcast, that is your bag. For other people, it's not so much. But yeah, I think there's a lot of moving parts. It's very complex, very complicated. Individuals and organisations have come and gone in that time. They have also made mistakes, but they have also made progress. No one is perfect. But yeah, there's all kind of things we don't know about, we don't hear about when it comes to this topic. So yeah, for me, the big change for me has been that being able to step back and try and take a broader view of what's being said and who's saying it. And doing the podcast in the way I've done it, there's been some kind of small changes and tweaks in the way it's presented, but I think that gives the audience, for me, a fairer chance to make up their own mind. I don't want to come on here and tell you who to believe, who to listen to, who to watch for, who not to watch for. I can only share my opinion and always try and state that it is my opinion and trust people to kind of make up their own mind. But thanks for watching and listening along the way. And Brian also asked if a wealthy backer or group agreed to fund whistleblowers, pensions, would that encourage more to come forward? Perhaps. Could you say Skywatcher is a group funded by wealthy backers? Alex Clokus and the group involved there are all independently wealthy and funding the work being done there. Does that change with that dog whistle going? Is that something that was part of those contracts? Perhaps. We don't know yet. Maybe we don't find out. I think the money side of it always raises an eyebrow or a red flag for a lot of folks. But again, if you knew you had some kind of financial protection there, as long as the vetting was done and the people funding that were aware of the individual being, all good, thumbs up, they are who they say they are, they're being honest, then yeah, perhaps. I think there's just a lot happens in the dark and murky backgrounds, and I think the treatment of David Grush from when he came out with the attacks, both personally and professionally, showed how someone making the statements he made could be treated. So yeah, I can see why a lot of folks did hang back and choose not to speak. And finally, a couple of comments from people asking me. Aaron asked, what about the Grush Luna Elizondo spat? So again, I commented on this on the last show with Pavel on the breakdown, if you've not checked that out, folks. But what I'll do is share another statement to finally close up from a listener. I think I've got two more, but this is on the Elizondo and Luna situation. So from Buffalo Gal, she says, as to the tiff between Elizondo and Luna on X, I live in the same town as Luis Elizondo. The closest major airport is 120 miles. Yes, we have an airport 35 miles away, but you have to connect to Denver, and there are few flights to choose from. Also, that time of year is our snowiest time of year, and the weather is very unpredictable. Since he made so many trips on his dime to DC, can you blame him for not showing up? He actually has commitments here and a family. Also, considering that Luna could only have been referring to a couple of people in the skiff flu comment, I think most would agree he had the right to defend himself since she went on Rogan to make that comment. I, as well as others, would like all of the information in all UAP related matters to be revealed, but that is not reality. These people are bound by NDAs and cannot tell what they know. I, as well as others, will continue to listen, but we all know that the government, military and industrial complex people control it. They control it all, and we may never know the truth. This is my personal opinion, Buffalo Gal. Thank you for throwing that in there, and I think that is fair to add those details in to why perhaps Lou Elizondo didn't travel. I think more and more it's looking like Luna was perhaps unfair in what she said on the Joe Rogan podcast, and it does seem that she can just speak, which can be great from a UFO speculation, gossip, chit-chat point of view, but it's not always completely coherent or correct, or it can be clouded by personal opinion at the time. And that's something I'm still getting comments and emails and people getting in touch with me from both sides or all sides of the US political spectrum who have different thoughts and feelings on the individuals involved. So yeah, it is what it is. For me, it wasn't a good look, the whole online debacle between Luna and Lou Elizondo. They could have kept that offline. You could argue Luna cast the first stone by saying what she said on a very public forum with the Joe Rogan podcast. But yeah, that's what I say when in this topic. Certainly no one is perfect. And the David Grush element being thrown in, David Grush hasn't come out and said anything himself, so you have to take that with a pinch of salt. Final listener question, folks, from Peter. He says, just a quick question from me in response to your thoughts email. I wonder, if you were to put yourself in the shoes of the gatekeepers that are frantically doing their best to put the toothpaste back in the tube, is all the confusion, infighting and overwhelm in this topic actually what you wanted? And if so, how did you do it and how will you keep doing it? I don't know if people will like this answer, Peter. However, I think the community and human nature, we do it to ourselves. You only have to throw one cat amongst the pigeons for so many different folks to carry on with their own stories. I think there's been so many examples of a few comments running wild and spreading information that may not necessarily be correct in recent time. I think that whole Miami Mall alien situation was... I never saw anything at all other than some folks looking for clickbait online that there was any aliens involved in that, and that it wasn't a bunch of youths causing issues and the police presence and whatnot. I know it was a big police presence, but I saw nothing alien related to that one. But folks online jumped on it. Same with some of the drone stuff, where so many people posted things online which were quite clearly just aircraft, claiming it was something else. And people jumped on it. So for me, the UFO community does enough infighting, there's enough disinformation, there's enough misinformation being spread. I try my best as, can I call myself a researcher? I suppose just looking into what I research, but there are far, far, far better researchers out there than me and doing what they do that can truly lay claim to being a top-class researcher or author or historian or podcaster or whatever you want to do. But again, appreciate you folks listening to and watching this for my own opinion. I think if you're a gatekeeper, you sprinkle a little bit of bullshit in amongst some truth, and then it's very hard to disseminate what is truth, what is bullshit, and all of the above. I think they just let people do it themselves. And social media has a lot of great elements to it. I think it also has a lot to answer for in a lot of different ways as well, Peter. But I would love to know Peter's thoughts on that question, and what are your thoughts, people listening and watching, on that very question. Looking ahead, a few things for me to finish on, folks. The podcast store is now open and online with new merchandise available. Check out thatufopodcast.com/store. Some great pieces on there, including some limited edition prints of the popular Fear and Loathing thumbnail from a few months ago. There were 25 available. Around half of those are now gone. Also, my favourite piece, I think, is the new Science the Shit Out of It t-shirt that I've bought myself and I'll be wearing soon on the podcast. Go check it out, and if you see something you like, why not treat yourself? If you don't, fuck it, don't. On that, my book that you may have heard me mention a few times is just over my shoulder here, Atlas of Unidentified Flying Objects, and believe it or not, folks, is out in around 3 weeks' time, mid-September. Exciting stuff. I started writing the book almost 2 years ago. I think it's a brilliant coffee table book. I would say that though, wouldn't I? It's a good conversation starter. Hopefully it complements your existing collection. Or if you don't have one, it'd be a good place to start, or maybe gift it to someone. You can get signed copies from Forum Books if you look up that website. I'll put the link in the description. But if you want a signed copy, then you have to get in quick, as I'm going to the store early September to sign a big batch of them already. So thank you to everyone who's done that. The bookstore is a small independent store, and they are overwhelmed with how many folks have ordered from around the world. So I'm looking forward to going and personalising those books. Or if you want to order from one of the usual outlets like Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Waterstones, etc., the link is in the description. And if when it's out you see it in a store, I'd love for you to take a snap of it and send me a picture or something, or share it online. Anything like that would be very helpful, folks. Even the pre-orders make a big difference from an Amazon point of view if you haven't already pre-ordered. I promise you, it's a really well put together book, and I don't mean just the writing from me, the whole team of people who worked on it to make it look and feel like it does. I truly believe it's a real premium quality book when you see it. I hope it'll surprise some people, I think. And last shout, as always, a huge thank you to everyone who supports on paid platforms. You can get a free trial to listen without any adverts, sponsors and early access. Plus bonus content is available from this price of a small coffee. Free trials, if you check out Apple and Patreon, are available available. Otherwise, Spotify, if you type in That UFO Podcast Premium, or YouTube have paid feeds to access. Big thank you to everyone who has listened or watched this far. And if you want to get involved, email over UFOUAPAM@gmail.com or use the contact form at thatufopodcast.com/contact. With the hearings over the horizon, lots of shows are coming, including a listener ramble. I've got loads of questions from people using those contact forms and emails to get through. There will be preview shows. I've got Stephen Bassett hopefully joining me in the next week or so to talk about the hearing in advance. And of course, we'll be analysing and breaking down what comes from those hearings and anything else that's going on in the UFO topic, with some new interviews also on the way. And with that said, I will speak to you all very, very soon.